Do you have a favorite setting for media? I do. My favorite setting for video games, movies, and TV shows is science fiction. Whether it's space travel, time travel, or something else, I always love getting into a good sci-fi story and experience. It's why I play a lot of the games that I do, like Megaton Rainfall from last month. I loved the space travel aspect of it. And it's why I got interested in this little game I saw in the coming soon section of the eShop, advertising itself as a 3D platform adventure game where you run around a Mars-esque barren wasteland in a spacesuit. That visual alone made me say, you know what, I want to play and cover this game. And thanks to a review code that the developer sent me, I am doing just that. Here is my review of Lifeless Planet for the Nintendo Switch. In the near future, a team of astronauts is sent to a planet filled with life, all of 15 light years from planet Earth. In this game, you play as one of those astronauts, as you crash land and find that this planet, supposedly filled with life, is actually a barren wasteland. Upon searching for your missing crew, you find a Russian-made town and a laboratory on the planet, turning your mission quickly from exploration and colonization to figuring out how the Russians got there and what happened to both them and the planet. Now, the story aspect of this game is interesting, but it also has its faults. What I like is the fact that there's tons and tons of background information and lore information teaching you who the Russians were, how they got to the planet, what happened to the planet, and I just eat up lore and background information when it comes to sci-fi. The negative part of the story is the fact that the main characters don't really have much depth to them. They set up a really interesting background for one of the secondary main characters, but by the time you find out that background, they don't really do much with it because you find out almost right before the game ends. And I view that as a big missed opportunity because I really liked that character's background. And I really wish they would have shown more of them before the game ended. In terms of gameplay, Lifeless Planet is a third-person adventure game with a large emphasis on platforming. In all of the game's chapters, you're going to be traveling through large environments, platforming around in your spacesuit, and doing some light puzzle solving, trying to open the way towards the next chapter as you learn more about what's going on. Despite the environments looking huge enough to be a sandbox, progression is pretty simple and pretty linear. Your goal in each area is to find where you need to go and collect all of the items and solve all of the puzzles necessary to open up that path. But what you're doing isn't the unique and interesting part of the game's gameplay, it's how you're doing it. You're running around an unsafe environment in a spacesuit, and a lot of the gameplay elements are themed around that spacesuit. Many of the game's chapters will start with an oxygen leak in your suit, needing you to run across a new area, learn the area as you go, and reach an oxygen refill station before you pass out. And it's also extended into the platforming. You can do double jumps and even long moonwalk-like jumps using the jetpack for your spacesuit. And although all of the movement and platforming is pretty simple, it does have its charming and rewarding moments. Every time I was going through the game and I came across a canister of jetpack fuel to create those really long moonwalk-like jumps to go over cliffs, go over gaps, go over craters, it was always a joy-filled rush to see that happening. For just a moment, let's talk about these large environments. When you go into each level and you see these giant environments you're going through, it looks kind of like a sandbox. But at the same time, all of these huge giant environments feel so empty and barren. There's not really that much for you to do, especially considering that there's no combat system, and the only quote-unquote enemy in the game doesn't show up as anything but stationary environment for most of the game's levels. So for as large as these areas are, they just kind of feel empty, both in environments and in what you're doing. And that raises some conflict from a review standpoint, because although these areas are barren and empty, the setting of the game makes perfect sense for them to be barren and empty. You're exploring an almost completely dead planet, so it makes perfect sense for there to be nothing there for you to see. It's hard to look at this because there are good points for both sides of this situation. And now let's talk about time and length. This isn't a super long game. On your first run, you should be spending at least 4 to 5 hours before you actually get to the end of the game, which mostly depends on how often you get stuck and whether or not you refer to a walkthrough when you do get stuck. The game also doesn't really have any post-game content. You can replay the game from any chapter once you clear it, but the only real point of this is to re-experience the game or look for little files with lore that you missed on your first run. In other words, there's not really anything extra to do once you beat the game. Now, to jump into controls really quick, there's a very strange control issue when you're playing with certain controllers. When you're playing in handheld mode, and when you're playing with the Joy-Cons detached, the game doesn't really have any problems with controls, but when I was using my Pro controller, I noticed a fair amount of input lag when I was moving the camera with the right analog stick. Note that this always happens when I use my Pro controller, and it never happens when I use handheld mode or the Joy-Cons. Now let's talk presentation. I wouldn't say the graphics of this game are going to win any awards, but it works well with its setting. There's not a huge amount of detail on all of the environment models, but the way the game handles draw distance and the way it shows itself to you definitely help. It looks good in handheld mode and looks pretty decent in docked mode, but that's also the same way with all versions of this game. The only real complaint I have when it comes to presentation is its music placement. The suspenseful music that you get when some big event's about to happen is really good and really impactful. But throughout most of the game, when I was playing and walking through all the wastelands, I was just walking around listening to the sound of the wind and sometimes listening to absolutely nothing at all. I don't know if that's the same with the PC and other versions of the game, but it just felt like there was only a very small portion of the game's playtime that actually used music. Now let's dive into battery life. A lot of games with graphical styles that aren't made to be super high definition and super beautiful typically benefit handheld fans with battery life. Did Lifeless Planet do this? Let's find out. Here are my battery times from 100% to 0%. Maximum brightness with Wi-Fi on, 2 hours and 46 minutes. Maximum brightness with Wi-Fi off, 2 hours and 57 minutes. Lower brightness with Wi-Fi on, 3 hours and 6 minutes. Lower brightness with Wi-Fi off, 3 hours and 20 minutes. Well, it's not a huge amount of battery life. If nothing else, you're going to get through most of this game on one charge. Now, in conclusion, Lifeless Planet is a very intriguing game for any sci-fi fan that likes what-if scenarios regarding humanity's potential journey into the stars. Now, this game is brought down by a few aspects like the lack of character depth in its story and the campaign being a little bit short for the asking price. But if you're someone who likes the idea of spacesuit platforming, it's definitely worth a look. Reviews to Go rates Lifeless Planet for the Nintendo Switch a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or head to the website at reviewstogo.com. Before I go, I want to thank everybody who's donated both to me and my Patreon campaign. Your donations have quickly gotten my website back up on its feet in the past and continue to be used to bring more content and better content to the channel. So thank you to everybody who's donated, and if you'd like to donate, head on over to patreon.com/reviewstogo. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day.